Welcome to the third University of Louisiana System Budget Briefing webinar. My name is Jackie Tisdall. I'm the Communications Director for the University of Louisiana System, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Quickly, if you haven't joined us before, let me give it some logistics for the webinar. They are 30 minutes in length, including presentation and question and answer. All the microphones are muted except for our speakers. If you would like to submit a question for the speakers, please use your question or chat module. And those questions come directly to me. They are anonymous. No one else gets to see them. And then I will address those to our speakers at the end of the presentation, as many as time will allow. The webinar is being recorded and will be archived at ulsystem.edu/budget. Today's focus is on closures and mergers. Before we introduce our panelists, I would like to launch a poll to gauge. Right now the poll is open. Would like you to complete the sentence. The process to close or merge starts and stops with the Board of Regents, management governing boards, the governor, the legislature, or the citizens through a vote of the people. Now, while you're continuing to make your selections on that poll, go ahead and introduce our speakers. Will be University of Louisiana System President, Dr. Sandra Woodley, University of Louisiana System Vice President of External Affairs, Rachel Kincaid, and University of Louisiana System Vice President of Business and Finance, Dr. Edwin Lidoff. Now, the poll will be open for just couple more seconds, so if you have not voted, please do so, and the answer to your question will be in later on in the presentation. All right, I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share it. You should see the results on your screen. 49% of our respondents believe it starts and stops with the legislature, followed by 24% believe it's the Board of Regents, then 13% management boards, and 11% citizens, and 4% the governor. So stay tuned for the answer to that question. Now, before our speakers get started, I think it's important to give some historical context on the subject. So we have a couple of little milestones, well, not little, important milestones for the history of higher education as it relates to our current structure of four-year and two-year institutions. And we did not begin with the 29 institutions that we have right now. From 1853 to 1974, 13 of our current universities evolved from creation to becoming two-year schools, then moving on to the four-year university status. 1974 was a really big year for higher education. It was the creation of the Board of Regents and three of the management boards, LSU, Southern University System, and the Board of Trustees for state colleges and universities. From 1995 to 1999 was another big transition. There was the creation of 4 new community colleges and the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. Also, the Board of Trustees was renamed the University of Louisiana System, and they transferred the community colleges that they oversaw to the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. So you see that we remained with 13 four-year institutions and grew to 10 two-year institutions. In 2001, LSU Alexandria became the 14th school to move to four-year university status, which grew our four-year universities to what it currently is at 14. And the resulting 9 two-year institutions. In 2003, Fletcher and Sewella moved from being technical colleges to two-year community college status. And then from 2005 to 2012, 4 new two-year schools were created under the LCTC system. The Central Louisiana Technical Community College, South Central Louisiana Technical College, Northwest Technical College, and North Shore Technical Community College, which grew to what our current two-year institution makes up 15. It's important to note that new colleges were not created from scratch. There were, when LCTCS was established in '95, there were 40 technical schools spread throughout the state. They were governed locally, not statewide, and so from the '90s until currently, there was significant change in the LCTC system and consolidating those technical schools and then moving them to these two-year schools. So, which is pertinent because it is talking about merging. Now, before I turn it over to Dr. Woodley, keeping those milestones in consideration, this is really interesting to see how the historical enrollment in public post-secondary education. You see in the '90s when LCTCS was created, UL system had shifted the community colleges to that system, which is the shift you see in '98, '99. And then enrollment stayed consistent with the UL system, LSU, and Southern, and the community college system just grew the overall post-secondary education enrollment. So it has been, I believe, very successful in that we had the capacity and we've continued to grow. 2005 is Katrina, and so you do see the dip and impacts of Katrina there. But one thing I wanted to mention is the significant change with the community college system and the growth of that system was all very strategic. There was a 2001 master plan that the Board of Regents put out that helped formulate a statewide strategic approach to growing enrollment in our community colleges. It was collaborative with our universities. The universities phased out their associate's degrees that as LCTCS grew and the capacity grew to take those students and award those two-year degrees. And it has been long-term, and the investments have paid off. So with that being said, I'd like to now turn it over to UL System President, Dr. Sandra Woodley.
Thank you, Jackie. And while we stay on this slide for a little bit longer, I think partially this slide sets up the context for the entire topic that we'll be talking about today. You can see that we now have 213,000 students in our entire system of higher education, including the community colleges. And if you look back at 1995 or 96, you can see that, that number has grown. And the issue that we find ourselves in Louisiana is that even though we have over 200,000 students in the pipeline, we actually need to significantly increase that number. We have a very low educational attainment rate and huge workforce gaps, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. And we do want to make sure that we have access for students in Louisiana to be educated for a variety of reasons. The next slide, just a reminder of where we are on the budget history. You can see from 2009 to 2015, higher education has lost over $700 million. Our own system, the University of Louisiana system, is down almost $300 million in that same time frame. And as you saw from the enrollment earlier, we have basically steady enrollment and a few increases during that time. The shift in funds, the source of funds is important to note too. We have had over 61% increase in tuition and fees while our state funding has plummeted over this period of time. We're down $90 million when you count the tuition dollars. And as we talked about in previous webinars, we are concerned about the affordability of our students because our goal is to increase the number of students who choose to come and graduate from our institutions. The next slide shows our target. As we've talked about in all of the webinars so far, and we'll talk about in every single one of them, the number 608 is very important. We need $608 million from the legislature added to the governor's executive budget in order for us to just maintain our current funding level, which, as you will see later, is still relatively low. We need to be able to get all of these dollars back into our institutions so that we can make progress on our goals. Now, this brings up an important question because with this huge number, this huge task of asking the legislature to find revenue somewhere to fill this gap, the question has been raised many, many times, well, maybe we need a new governance structure. Maybe we're not very efficient. Maybe we need to close or merge universities. Maybe we have too many colleges and universities. And I think what we want to do in this session is to talk a little bit about those issues. First of all, I think we can review what our current governance structure is. So on the next slide, you can see what our governance structure is currently. We have the Board of Regents, who is the coordinating board for all of higher education, and there are 4 systems. The University of Louisiana system is the largest system in that category, and you can see the institutions that are included in our system. Then there are some other, some other boards. And I think comparisons have been made about whether or not this is the right mix, and also whether or not a different mix could give a different outcome. The next slide shows what the case is in multiple states. Now, as you can see here, it's all over the map. There are lots of different kinds of governance structures. In fact, the most popular governance structures has even more boards included. 16 states, for example, have coordinating boards like the Board of Regents, governing board like UL system, but also individual institutional boards. And so you can see that that's a great number of boards. The other thing is, when you look at how many states operating with no coordinating board, you've got 11 there. You have 10 states that have 1 coordinating board. Nevada is an interesting example. Nevada actually has 128 system office employees. By the way, we have 15. And 11,812 total employees with the different campuses, and they only have $2.8 million in population. So the point of this slide is just to demonstrate the fact that there is really no one clear way in which a state can be organized in order to do higher education. And in fact, the next slide will show that studies have shown, our own studies that were released in 2012 from this information, says there's really no ideal education governance structure. There's no correlation between the type of structure you have and what you're able to achieve. And I think that's true in Louisiana. I think it's about people and leadership, and it's about the work that's going on at the campuses to be able to achieve the outcomes. It's really not about the governance structure. That's not to say that you couldn't change the governance structure. There certainly could be changes in the governance structure. It's just that the changes itself will not produce a different result. Now, the big question, again, is, do we have too many colleges and universities? When you look at mergers or closures, I think it's important to start with, how does this even happen if it could happen? So the next slide allows you to see that the process, and this was your question earlier, starts and stops with the legislature. The legislature has to request a study to look at closures or mergers or reorganization, and at that point it's the responsibility of the Board of Regents to do that study, and they have 1 year to do it, and the Board of Regents is responsible for making a recommendation to the legislature. At that point, the legislature would have that study, and they can act. They have to act in order to do any of these closures or mergers or reorganization of the governance structure. And in many cases, it requires 2/3 vote of the legislature to get any of that done. So it's hard and very difficult politically to make changes, but the real question is, would it be worth the effort to make the changes? Do we have too many colleges and universities? Let's look at a little bit of a comparison. There are so many statistics out there that look at, how many institutions, 2-year, 4-year, compared to population, compared to, educational attainment rate in dollars per FTE. And you can see the comparison here between Louisiana and a national average, which is not too far off on the number of institutions. The thing to point out, though, is we actually have more work to do in Louisiana than the national average. We only have less than 22% of our population that has a baccalaureate degree or higher, and just to achieve average, we need almost 29%. The other interesting point that will help us in our conversation later is we have fewer dollars per FTE with which to do this work. The next slide, I think, is the real issue. The real issue is, what do we need to do? How many graduates do we need in the state? And what is the gap? How many are we currently producing? Now, this particular slide is only singling out particular areas. And when we worked on the WISE program last year, and when we had the $40 million and the very thoughtful WISE plans to try to close these gaps, this is the analysis that came out of it. You can see there are huge gaps, numbers of jobs that will be available to people in Louisiana if only we can find a way to educate them. But we need 17,000 more graduates every single year by 2018 in order to start to make a dent in these gaps. Now, when you look at the next slide, to put that into context, we almost currently produce 17,000 degrees. We produce about 16,500 degrees. So in effect, you know, we would have to double our numbers to be able to achieve the kinds of graduates that we need. So the bottom line is, Louisiana needs more education, not less. And we have to be able to ramp up our production in order to meet these degrees. And closing an institution would actually restrict access, as we'll talk about a little bit later, and not make it easier. The next slide, I think, is also a very important point. The universities in the University of Louisiana system, when compared to their statistical peer groups, are basically on parity with two performance metrics, retention rates and graduation rates. In other words, we are actually producing at the average of our peers, but on the other end of the slide, we're doing it with about 40% less dollars per FTE. So performance for the money, we definitely are doing very well. I think there is certainly a limit to what we will be able to do, and as we all know, we are not satisfied with our graduation rates and our retention rates and our degree production. We want to increase it. But when you have 40% fewer dollars than average, according to peers who have the same performance rate, it becomes very difficult to achieve, which is why it is even more important and crucial that we find that $608 million this year so that we can at least maintain the current level of funding and also to be able to increase our degree production. Now, we already have been working hard to operate more efficiently. You don't have to close or merge an institution to become more efficient, and our university systems, and not just ours, is taking this quite seriously. You know, we're more than 4,000 fewer employees than we had a few years ago. We have almost 900 fewer faculty. We have 600 fewer administrators, a 25% decrease in administrative levels. We've eliminated or consolidated over 562 academic programs. We've also increased online courses and degrees, and we've increased collaborative degrees. Now, the student-faculty ratio, in other words, the number of faculty that we employed to teach our students, was on average 19 in 2008, and it's now 22 per student in 2012. I want to say here on this slide that we do believe that we can do more, and we think that there are emerging trends that can also help us become more efficient and use our resources even more wisely, and some of those initiatives you'll see coming out of the UL system in the coming months. But we do want to become even more efficient. So what determines whether you have too many institutions or whether you don't have enough? My belief is it's not about the number of institutions. It's about the number of students that you're serving and about the number of students that you want to serve. What this graph illustrates is that students are the cost drivers. When you think about it logically, the number of students you have determines how many faculty you need to support those courses and how many classrooms and facilities and overhead that you need to support that work. It also determines what kind of academic support services that you need for retention and graduation rates and registering and all of those things. And so the bottom line is, when you look at academic costs, the major cost drivers to the institutions, It's not about the number of institutions. The costs really follow the students. And that's why it's really important to note that anything that we do, any changes that we make that would restrict access for students could be detrimental to our goal, and not only would it not save money, it would actually cost money. The next slide shows something that is a little busy, but the takeaway from the slide is that, most of the people in Louisiana stay here. They're born here, they stay here, they go to college here, and this hasn't really changed very much in Louisiana. So the work that we do in higher education for a large measure goes to educate the workforce for Louisiana and not another state. The other important point to note is on the next slide that most of the students that go to our colleges go very close. They live very close to the colleges. And my own personal story, I think, illustrates the really need here. Access and geographic access is extremely important. Most of our colleges are regional in nature. They have huge economic impacts for their communities, and they serve students who live very close to them. When I was going to school, I was working full-time, and I had children, and I had to work during the day and go to school at night. So it was really important to me that my institution be in my community. And we know from our own data that the majority of our students are like me and not a first-time full-time freshman that comes right out of high school and goes to a college and lives in the dorm. Most of our students are place-bound. They have families. They have obligations. They have responsibilities. They have financial barriers. So having a college in your community or a university in your community is what provides the access that allows us to continue to educate Louisiana. And the next slide, this is just an illustration to elaborate on my argument. What if we wanted to be more efficient in grocery stores, for example? It would certainly be more efficient if we only had 3 mega stores. And it would even be more efficient beyond that if we didn't have everything in every store. You can imagine, it would be easy to ship those things in bulk. You don't have to have as many directors and overseers. You could just have these mega stores. And maybe you have the meat in the south, and you have the vegetables and the other items in the north. Certainly mathematically and economically that would be more efficient. Now, what's wrong with that is the reason that you have a grocery store is so that you have access to diapers and formula and food at a time when you need it. Very few people are going to drive 1 or 2 or 3 hours to be able to go to these stores and pick up their everyday needs for their family. Colleges and universities, particularly regional colleges and universities, are no different. It's really important that there be these geographic access into the community so these working adults can go to a college that they need. It's also not true that you want to just only concentrate or specialize degrees in any one university, because you want there to be choice and access for students all over the state wherever they intend to go. So I think in the same way that it's not wise, even if it is efficient, to have only 3 grocery stores in Louisiana, I think it is also very important to maintain the geographic access that is provided by having these regional universities in the communities that they serve. And the next slide talks a little bit about some of the studies that back up this assertion. We recently had an effort to propose a merger of SUNO and University of New Orleans. They did a national study on that. Of course, that merger was unsuccessful, and you can see some of the things that came out of it. They were worried about denying opportunities, to the adults in the New Orleans area. They were worried about geographic access. They're worried about it actually also not saving money, but it ignores the concerns and the culture that were essential for a successful merger. So, I think the information and the data do support the assertion that it's not about the number of universities or colleges, and those regional universities are very important, but we do have to find a way to meet the needs of students all over the state. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, quickly, can you even save money if you close campuses? And the answer is no. If we look at the next slide, you can see that it actually costs you money initially to close a college. if you had a university that receives only $32 million in funding, and by the way, the percent state funding is dwindling at every single one of the colleges, you have $142 million of obligated funds that you have to pay. You have retirement costs that you have to do. You have bonded indebtedness. For example, in our state, in our system, there's over $700 million. It's 3 times the state funding that is owed for facilities that are at the institutions that would have to be picked up from somewhere. So actually closing a university doesn't really save money anyway. So what are the takeaways? The takeaways are, number one, we have to understand that it is the students that we serve and the degrees that we need and the workforce gaps that we have to fill that is the most important thing that drives the cost. It doesn't matter about the number of institutions. It matters about how we serve those students, and the cost follows the institutions. And as I said earlier, we need to double our numbers. We need to double our numbers of graduates, particularly in these high-demand areas, and we need these regional universities to provide access for students who need options close to home. And finally, closures or mergers do not save money, and they will restrict access. So with that, Jackie, I think we can open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Woodley. The first question is an important one. What is an FTE? We showed the FTE funding.
The FTE is a full-time equivalent student. So what that means is when you look at your entire enrollment and you put it into a full-time, count up the part-time students to get to a full-time equivalent is basically the number of full-time students that you have on your campus.
Excellent. Okay, and the next question is, aside from the direct dollars saved from closing any institution, what is the larger economic impact on the community and subsequently tax revenue to the state where a closure occurs? Would community impacts be factored into a closing decision?
Well, typically, you know, those are not factored in, not mathematically, not directly, but that is a very good point because each one of our institutions has huge economic impact, 7 times for every dollar, $7 for every dollar that, you know, they spend. It advances that community. You can think about all the goods and services, for example, that are purchased, all the employees that actually work at the institutions, all the subsidiary businesses that support the work of the institution, all the research that goes on. These institutions are economic engines beyond what they do to educate employees, and so I think that it makes it an even stronger argument that, you know, the answer is not to close an institution.
Thank you, Dr. Woodley. And with that being said, we actually have a couple other questions, but we are out of time at this moment. I want to thank everybody for joining the webinar and want to also make sure you're aware that next week's webinar, Friday at 11:30 on March 27th, will be focusing on tuition and fees. You do have to register for that webinar as well as this one, and you can do that on our website. Dr. Woodley, would you like any final words?
Thank you again for your interest in this process and in our university system, and we appreciate the commitment that you have to helping us solve this problem.